Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, planet Earth, North America, the United States of America, California, Los Angeles, to be specific. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Agree to Disagree here on the TNAM Radio Network at thenewamericanmedia.com. My name is Brian Engelman. I am your host, as I have been for the past 4.5 years, and I appreciate each and every one of you checking out the program and everything that we're doing here. It's been a great year, and we're really just warming up. So thank you. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do that. youtube.com/thenewamericanmedia. Listen to the commercials as they play. Don't skip them, and it's like tossing a penny or two into our wishing well. And that's a fantastic thing, because it all helps out at the end of the day. Our homepage is thenewamericanmedia.com, and on the right-hand side are three things you'll want to know about. It has the TNAM radio button on the right-hand side. That's where you click play to listen live. And that's a good thing, because we're going live right now. Oh, so you broadcast every day at 5 o'clock Pacific time? No, not necessarily. We broadcast when it makes sense. We broadcast when we can connect with our guests. And we send out notifications on Facebook and Twitter to let you know. Give you a little heads up, and then we go live. So set your notifications if you want. And that's how you'll find us. Underneath the TNAM radio button is the Facebook link. You can do it from our homepage, thenewamericanmedia.com, or go on Facebook and search The New American Media with spaces in between, and then you can like the page. Also over there is our Twitter feed. We're at American_media_. Today we're going to be talking with former Coast to Coast host Ian Punnett, and we're excited you guys have joined us. What's the name of this show one more time? What channel is this?
Your guide to the truth, thenewamericanmedia.com.
There you go, the New American Media. I love that. All right, so without further ado, let's get into this. I mean, we could talk about, well, I guess we could. Let's do that. There's a big earthquake today. Those things happen. Seems like Afghanistan and Pakistan get a lot of really bad earthquakes. Interesting, given our military presence over there. Also, huge hurricane worked its way up through western Mexico on the Pacific and then kind of veered inland. Perhaps the strongest hurricane on record. That's an interesting piece of information, given all of the stories that we've read about HAARP and weather manipulation. Interesting to think about. Looks like Ben Carson is up in the polls on Trump in Iowa. Okay, it's Iowa, but still, it's an important milestone, something to take note of. His soft-spoken ways. Hillary Clinton did her Benghazi hearing. Yep. That was beautiful. Never believed the YouTube lie. Not for a second. Turns out, yeah, that's pretty much it. It was a lie. I don't know, to save face, or there was more to the story. We'll see. We'll see. But I do want you to check out some of the footage we got from Politicon. We went there, Blake Wally and myself went there, was it about 2 weeks ago now? Los Angeles Convention Center, and got some interesting interviews with radio talk show host Larry Elder and Hugh Hewitt, talking about both Cleveland sports and politics. Talked with Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks. A lot of radio guys. David Webb, John Fugelsang. Good stuff. Check it out, and including an interview with the Yes Men and Edward Snowden. It's a must-see interview. You gotta check it out. You'll know within a few minutes why it's a must-watch. So check those out, as well as our conversation a couple days ago with Zach Barris, former NBA scout. We do an NBA preview show on our sports show called The Unhappy Hour. Yes, because I'm a Cleveland sports fan. Indians, Cavs, Browns. And I've never celebrated a championship in my life. So, that's what we do over there. All right, let's go to Ian Punnett, see if we can bring him on board. And without further ado, we have Ian Punnett. Ian, it's Brian. You're live on the air. How you doing, sir?
I'm so happy to be here.
Same here.
You're calling me, so I was sitting here thinking, okay, well, like I haven't heard. Did you call?
Yeah, we did that a couple of times.
I'm sitting right here. I was so weird, and I'm literally thinking.
I am telling you, me and Skype just don't get along. Yes, Oh, it actually had it pulled up. I was calling it like 505, 507, 508, 510, 512.
And I'm sitting right here going, well, okay, it's like it's their thing, but I don't want to tell them what to do. I'm not going to be the radio guy that comes in to say, well, here, let me. So I thought, well, I better. So that's when I thought I better check one more time, and here you are. So yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No. It's all good. That's the fun of what I do here. I'm the producer. I'm the engineer. I'm the on-air talent. I use that word loosely. And it's a one-man show. And I'm telling you, I have so many glitches. You know who's famous for having the most glitches when I do a show with? One of your former colleagues.
I think that was just me. I think whatever record you've previously had, I believe that's me. No.
You've jumped right to the top of the list along with Mr. John B. Wells. Every time we talk, I don't know what it is, but I mean, we have the weirdest glitches, and it's over years it's been happening. So anyway, it's nice to have you, Ian.
To be had.
Yes. Well, you know, it was interesting because speaking of Mr. John B. Wells, there was a show we had up from a few months ago, and somebody put a comment on the YouTube channel and said, "Yeah, by the way," and he brought up tinnitus. I'm not really sure if I had been talking with John B. Wells about it, but he just said, "Yeah, you know, I got this thing, and I don't know if it's something you're interested in or not, but you know, it's kind of stupid that I did this to myself." And, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I replied back. I said, yeah, you know what? That's what happened to Ian Punnett. I haven't heard him on the radio in a couple of years. He used to do Coast. And so anyway, we had this conversation going back and forth. And I said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to Ian. I always listen to him on Coast and wanted to see what you're up to, man. Talk to us about what you went through at Coast and with the tinnitus and how that's holding up right now, because I know a lot of people are familiar with that situation.
Well, and I'm glad, and I will say then, too, I never presume that anybody remembers me from anything. So I'm assuming that in those first few minutes that I wasn't here until I finally decided to sniff you out, that that you explained who I was, like what my role was, and so I won't bother if you've already covered that.
No, you know what? I actually go backward. I like hearing somebody. I could go off and pull up a bio and read 3 sentences, and that's neat and that's professional. But I like hearing from the person, because I mean, we knew you from the weekend stuff at Coast to Coast. What was that, from '98 to 2013?
Something like that. I think it's like 99-ish.
Yeah.
I had a real blessed role at Coast, which I have to say I use as sort of a model that not many people get to do in life, at least somebody like me, and that I was sort of a grand experiment by Coast. They had when I came on to Coast, it was Art Belle doing Coast to Coast pretty much 7 days a week.
Jeez.
And he had he did a Sunday night version of Coast. He did the Dreamland thing, and he was always on. And then when he wasn't on, it was one of his friends, who some of whom were very good, and some of whom weren't that as good. But he had that was how they reached out to me, was we want to have some more people on the air with Art who get what he's doing, who understand science and religion in an alternative context,
right,
and can talk about things that Art likes to talk about on Coast intelligently without faking it, and we need to have somebody on there who can package it like we like radio packaged. And Art was very good about that. I know I was not his choice. I think they kind of forced me on him. But he was very gracious about it, as far as I know. And he had so I got the first show on Coast, other than Art's, to have it be labeled as a Coast to Coast show. So the fact that it was called Coast to Coast with Ian Punnett, as opposed to Coast to Coast with Art Belle, featuring tonight guest host Ian Punnett. And I took that role very seriously. And I was given something else, in that they wanted me to be essentially the practice canvas for Coast to Coast. And they wanted me to be the guy who did shows that they weren't sure about. If I could make them fly on Sunday night, then they would turn around and they would give them to Art during the week. So they would, knowing that my audience was smaller on Art's one night off,
Right.
they would use me as kind of a test kitchen. And if I could make a show out of it, then they would turn around and they would essentially redo the show later on, and they would give the show.
That's actually a really good way of describing it, a test kitchen. And if it works for the chefs, and if it works as your special one night, then maybe it makes its way onto the menu full time.
Yeah, and I loved that. Some people might be offended by that. I loved that. And I thought it was such an honor when somebody that I had done something with turned around and became a permanent feature on the show or took a larger role, some of which didn't happen, oddly enough, until a couple of the other hosts came in after Art. And so, like, somebody, like, even if I did a guest, and I really can't remember names, so I'm not going to out anybody, but there were a couple times when I did somebody, and I loved them as a guest, but Art didn't feel it. And then they brought in somebody else later on after Art, and they hit it off totally with the mainstream guest. And so that was great. I really liked that part. And then when I came back, I had to leave for a little while to finish seminary. And when I came back, then I got sort of became less of a deal. By that point, the show had sort of evened out a little bit. But especially for that first run, that was my job.
Well, you said that was forced on Art Belle in a way, kind of forced on him. What were you doing that caused you to be noticed that brought you into there? Explain kind of what you were working on at the time where just one day you became the guy doing the fill-in stuff for Art Belle.
Really good question. So I was on the air in Atlanta for Clear Channel. I was on the air full time on a pretty standard talk radio format for Clear Channel at the time, WGST in Atlanta, but I didn't fit because I just don't spend my time talking about politics in an agenda-driven way where I got on the air and was pounding the table and I was all mad about something.
Right.
And, that just wasn't my thing. And I really enjoyed talking. I mean, I enjoyed talking about politics, but it was really much more about in sort of a big picture sense. And I was involved with the station in a way where they didn't quite know what to do with me, and I didn't fit what the other hosts were doing, and I kind of refused to fit what the other hosts were doing. I'm not here to try to convince you how to vote one way or another. I'd like to be involved in conversations about voting, but in the end, if we disagreed, I was okay with that. Right. And that was very much unlike what the other hosts were. It was pretty much a bottom line, you're a conservative or you suck, kind of a thing, right? Because I didn't fit, I was noticed, and because they had known me from some other places, and they knew that I was known for doing a lot of rock radio and morning radio and having a lot of fun on the air, they thought, well, if he's a square peg here, I might fit into the round hole of Coast. And I think I kind of did that.
Excellent. And, going back to the tinnitus thing, because that was kind of the catalyst that kind of catapulted you away from what you were doing on Coast. And, coincidentally, like I said, that was the comment that caused me to go, I haven't talked with Ian yet. I'd like to reach out and say hello. So, I mean, it's a frustrating thing. I mean, I know Rush Limbaugh has problems, cochlear implants and those type of things, but tinnitus with the constant ringing, kind of give us an update on that, because, we were curious and, concerned too, because it didn't sound pleasant at all, and I'm sure it's, at least from what I know, it doesn't really go away, you just manage it. So talk to us a little bit about what that's been like and how it's been. Let me just say, I have to say this before we go any further, is I'm not, and I know that people will want to, and it's really sweet, and I appreciate their heart in the right place. I'm not looking for cures, and so in the sense that I frequently, when I talk about tinnitus, what happens is I get a million emails. People track me down and say, you have to try brown sugar if you go outside, and I'm grateful for all that, and there are some things that are coming, I think, that may change my life on that, but I'm not, one of the things I can't do
with tinnitus is I don't spend a lot of time talking about it, because the more you talk about it, the more you focus on it. And part of the trick of the no, hear me out. The part of the trick of the treatment is that you just don't talk about it, and you don't focus on it, and you don't listen for it, because the more you listen for it, the more you hear it. So I have no problem talking about it here, and I'm glad I never walk away from an opportunity in a way to advocate for people who are in my position. But I just wanted to say up front, as much as I'm grateful for other people that may want to reach out to me to try to fix it, you can't. And I'm good with it right now, and let's just leave the conversation here. If that's okay. You know what I mean, Brian? I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to head something off there that can be frustrating for everybody later.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what one of the listeners was saying, though. He was like, man, he felt bad that he did it to himself. He blamed going to rock concerts and doing a lot of video editing and this and that he was listening to things at really high volumes, and he kind of feels guilty, like he did that to himself in a way. He should have listened to that. Is it more self-inflicted, or is it just sometimes pop up and we don't really know why?
It's both. And so this is the thing. There are some people for whom it is entirely self-inflicted. And then there are others, and I'm probably in this category, who were genetically predisposed to it. And then I just happened to choose a career that put headphones on my head for 35 years. So it's like maybe a little bit like alcohol in that sense, right? There's some people who are just genetically predisposed to alcoholism,
right?
And one drink and their body's in love, and that's it, and then they're off having to take care of that. And other people can drink and stop and never have a problem. I was not in that category. So whatever it was, over a prolonged period of time, I did have a sense that it was coming. I was not in a place professionally where I could just stop at the very first sign of it, but I did stop reasonably toward the beginning of knowing that it was here to stay. And for that, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity and the wherewithal to just be able to pivot careers. But it was there was a period early on when I probably could have stopped just a little bit earlier and had less of a problem later. So what it is, and I'll just explain tinnitus for people that or tinnitus. I always call it tinnitus because tonight it's us, and every night it's us. It's just me and the tinnitus. So that's and tinnitus though is just as common a pronunciation. It is a real. It's kind of a mystery. We know that it's a neurological condition as much as it is a physiological one. What happens is nerves in your ear die, and that happens to everybody. And when the nerve cells die, some brains, like mine, decide to create a noise to fill in the gap to what the nerves used to report back as noise.
Oh.
So it's a little bit like, it's like a submarine ping. If you imagine, right, where they send out a sonar ping because you're trying to find where the rocks are, just ping, ping. But the brain keeps sending the ping to the nerves in the ear, and they never respond back. Wasn't that the plot of Star Trek 4 or 5? Which one was it where they had the whales? Remember? They're trying that big, obelisk, whatever it is, that big cylinder was trying to reach the whales, and the whales couldn't respond. It's like that. And so that noise though it just and it just never stops.
Is that the representation as best you can describe it, what it sounds like?
It's a little it's a little bit like a steel saw cutting into a pipe.
Yeah.
It's higher. It's got a slightly tinier or metallic sound, and there's an aspect to it that it is a little bit like a very loud night of crickets on a summer night. So between the steel saw and the really loud cricket, like a whole field full of crickets going at once, that's what it sounds like.
Wow. No, that's a very interesting condition where the brain is trying so hard to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed that it actually creates an issue.
Yeah, perfectly phrased.
I mean, it's just, it struck home for me, obviously, because I've been doing radio for, as long as I had the opportunity since college and whatnot, doing my own thing. And being in a rock band, being on stage, and, for the practices, I would wear ear protection. But, when I was live, whether I was singing or drumming or what have you, I wouldn't wear earplugs when I was live because I needed to hear everything. But I knew the more that I did that, there's going to be diminishing returns here. The more, I'm risking it every time I go out there. And, luckily I haven't had something... haven't had a condition like that, but I know my left ear from all the hi-hat and the snare cracking for how many years there on the drum kit. I know that my left ear functions differently than the right. And I think that's one of the movements that's going on right now in 2015 in general, is I think a lot of people are paying more attention to their health in a way that maybe we haven't for the past few decades, whether it's genetically modified foods, high fructose corn syrup, just the things we used to do. We're kind of looking at a different way, saying, well, is vaping better than smoking?
Right.
I don't know.
You bring up so you're a drummer, so I love drums, right? And
yeah.
I'm not a musician, although I took drums for a couple of years, and I took bass for a little while. I analyze music all the time because I really like to I like to take apart songs. And I get songs stuck in my head too. I don't know about you. And then I try to figure out like what is it about this hook? What is it that I love so much? So I know a little bit about drums. What's the name of that cymbal that it has little screws in it? The one that it's like an extra sibilant cymbal where it really. I was trying to think of this the other day because my brother played this Slingerland set when he was a kid, and it had a cymbal and it had these extra. I don't even know what to call it. And
probably a cymbal with rivets, maybe.
Yes. What's that called?
Well, I actually I know that my dad made some of those. He would actually drill into them and put little things in. I looked it up right now because I don't know the name. It's just saying cymbal rivets. There's Wuhan, China cymbal with rivets. Right. Sizzle cymbal might be.
The sizzle cymbal is what I was thinking of. That was what it was called at least when I was a kid, and that is a little bit like tinnitus.
Oh.
So I was as a drummer, I was going to try and pull you into a little bit. That extra, so it had a little of a sustain to it, right? So a cymbal already has some sustain, but that's a little bit more like what it's like. So that was the only reason I was excited. And I used to love how that cymbal sounded. I always thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's like that jangly, extended kind of yeah. No, it's No.
Yeah, so be careful with your ears. And there's a lot of musicians that have tinnitus. Obviously, it's a long list if you go online and you type it in, some of whom have it much worse than I do. So, I'm always kind of grateful for the amount that I have, in that I know it could be worse. And there are plenty of veterans who are coming back and have come back for years, and they have it so much worse than I do. I have disruptive tinnitus. It's 24/7. I'm in the worst category, but even in the worst category, there are people who have it worser than I do. And I'm just like, I really do. I'm very grateful that at least this much I can handle by making lifestyle choices that are different. And there are some people who, as I hear, is that they literally, like some vets, are practically, they spend like 3 months like balled up on the floor because it's so loud and they just can't handle it.
I couldn't even imagine that. I had a migraine once. Thank God, only one time in my life, and it was just that crippling, debilitating. You can't have the light off. You can't have the light on. Your eyes can't be open. They can't be closed. You can't be sitting. You don't want to be cold. You don't want to be hot. It's just everything you do is wrong. And yeah, do the vets get that? Is that like a lot of like the shell shock from the percussive? If there's a IED on the roadside, does that set it off, or it's just the machine gun fire, or it's just a combination?
Yeah, it's just. I hate to use shell shock because it has more of a specific connotation, but it has. it is definitely just when the nerves are killed under any circumstance. But the fact that so many times what can happen is, a mortar can go off, and then they have that ringing in their ear for like about 30 minutes, and then it goes away.
Oh,
and then right, and then they're okay. But they were too close to a shell going off, or because they've been around machine guns going off, or whatever, they get that ringing in their ear. But then it just never stops. So they get it very much like it may come in a faster period of time because of the exposure is bigger over the course of months, and they've got it for the rest of their life.
Right. Well, you were kind of implying that there are some nice things coming down the pike as far as there might be some new things on the horizon. Is there anything in particular that seemed extra interesting and maybe hopeful?
Surgery that they're working on in England. Although I talked to a friend of mine, I've mentioned this on the air, so I'm not name dropping, but Harry Shearer, one of the voice of The Simpsons.
Love
right?
that guy. One of my favorite shows.
Right. And I hadn't finished watching Treehouse of Horrors from the other night, but it looked funny. And so Harry, in Spinal Tap and a lot of other stuff, he got his tinnitus in a single time event.
Oh, can I guess the event? Was it when he turned his amp to 11?
He was on a float in New Orleans because he's a big supporter of New Orleans, and he was on a float helping out somebody during Mardi Gras, and there was a disc jockey on the float that was refusing to turn down the speakers, and he couldn't move from where he was. And then there was a rather loud noise event that happened even after he'd been complaining several times, and that's what gave him this permanent tinnitus. Wow. But he's in England. He lives about half the time in London, and Harry got a hold of an experimental treatment they were doing there, which he swears by, which is coming to the U.S. It's non-invasive, but there's another there is an actual surgery that's coming that's been under review for about a year by the FDA, I believe. It was created at Southern Illinois University, but in the U.S. we don't allow live testing on human subjects or something like that, and which I'm all for. I'm not complaining, but they apparently don't have a problem. How weird is that, doing live experiments on humans in Germany? Anyway, they were doing these experiments in Germany, and it's effective. And what it requires is the cutting of a particular nerve. And essentially what it does is it reboots the brain.
Oh, a Control-Alt-Delete, a hard reset.
It kind of is. And what it does is if they cut this particular nerve, they were able to isolate it in mice. And when the brain knows no longer to keep looking for those nerve cells, so that's the only thing that changes is the brain stops looking for those dead cells.
I wonder, there's probably a GPS analogy if there are old roads and old highways that aren't really traversed as much anymore. If they're taken off of the option list, if the GPS could function more effectively. I'm sure there's a really good analogy in there if I develop that, but I'm still thinking it through live here.
I think that's about right. That's interesting. Yeah, and it's sort of if you can. All of this is about redirecting the brain from making the noise. All of the treatment is about redirecting the brain from hearing the noise. So it still goes on, but I have these little tricks that I do all day long to try to create.
Well, what kind of tricks do you have for the guy that left the comment that kind of sparked this introduction, which we're happy to have you, and you're on Twitter at Deacon Punnett, that's Punnett, for people that want to follow you. What kind of tips and tricks do you have for this guy and anyone else that might be suffering with this right now?
Well, there is a method. It does take time. And that is if you go to an audiologist, don't go to an EMT. They're not really equipped for that. They're much more mechanical. But audiologists have there's something called TRT, which is a retraining therapy, and you create a series of distracting, very small, essentially white noise features in your life. but your brain begins to listen for the white noise instead of the tinnitus. And the white noise is pleasant, and the white noise is, non-disruptive. So the more you can get your brain to listen for background noises instead of the foreground tinnitus, the faster you can do that, the easier you get relief. It took me about 2 years to master it.
Wow. And okay, so as you said that, I know a lot of people that work graveyard shift, like they'll sometimes have like a sound machine that they'll play with the white noise, and sometimes it can be galactic sounds from outer space. Sometimes it's rain falling or city noise or crickets, whatever they're used to. So as you said that, I have no idea what this is, but I just started rubbing my fingers together. It's a very small, it's a little sound I make for my cats. Like if they're in the room, I don't want to wake the other cat up, and I just want to get their attention. But it's a little. You can hardly hear it, but is it that type of what types of noises do you tap your foot? Do you hum to yourself, or what kind of white noise?
It was actually, you talked about it. I have machines going.
Oh, okay.
So I have I do it two ways. Sometimes I have a plug in a tub that lets out a little bit of water, just a little trickle, so I can fill up a tub, and it creates a very organic white noise of the sound of a tub draining, but it lasts a very long time. I have a floor fan that has a white noise feature, so it intentionally makes this sort of misty kind of noise. I have some of those machines like you'd see at Sharper Image that do the babbling brook or the rainforest on a summer night.
Right.
You do anything that's non-melodic, anything that doesn't get you focused on a melody of any type. You don't want it to hook into your imagination where you're tapping your foot along to it. You want it to create just a wallpaper, an audio wallpaper that your mind slowly focuses on away from the tinnitus.
And that's got to be tricky for you, because you were saying earlier you always get songs stuck in your head. Right. You get hooks and you deconstruct songs. Man, that's got to be a trick.
That's exactly right. So I'm a by nature, I'm kind of a drummer, although I don't. But I find myself drumming all the time, and I listen for rhythms, and I find rhythms where there aren't any. And
you're into jazz. I get it.
Yeah, I am actually. I was just, I like certain types of jazz, and I really like hip hop, and I like things that are very rhythmic, and so I spend a little time every day with music, and then the rest of the time I kind of have to avoid it. And so, but we're supposed to. It's actually part of the therapy that you spend a little time every day with music intentionally, so that you don't become afraid of sound. And there's something called misophonia, which sounds like I'm saying I'm so phony, but
it does.
Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. But I am But misophonia is a real condition that people with tinnitus get, where you're just afraid of any sound. You can't get like that. That you also can't let happen. So every day I have to listen to a little bit of music intentionally, and I really enjoy that time.
And so being the guy that's done radio, like you said, in Atlanta for a while, and then being on coast, obviously you're putting on the headset and you're talking all day. What was it about that process that was just even more taxing and just made it crystal clear it was time that a change had to be made? What was it about the process in itself?
Well, I did radio starting from when I was 14. I was working in radio, and
14. Where was that?
I started very young, and I worked my way through college. I had to pay for college myself.
But so what job took you at 14? Where were you doing that?
I was at an oldies station. Well, my high school had a radio station that was fairly professional. We were broadcast. It was not we actually had a frequency.
Oh, okay.
So I did that, and I did radio commercials a little bit when I was a kid, and I was sort of I did commercials for Catherine Clark Bread, and I did a couple of. There was a guy in my neighborhood who was a professional radio commercial producer, so I did some of those. By about 17, I was working full time in radio. 17 or just turned 18. And I was working full time Monday through Friday at an oldies station in Highland Park, Illinois.
Wow.
And I was going to college in the daytime and working oldies radio at night. And so I did that all the way through. I mean, I'd always done it. And I worked my way through grad school, getting my master's, doing radio, and I never stopped. And I started to do TV stuff, and then I was just around audio constantly. I was working with bands, as we talked about, and so I was just always, audio was just something I just never got away from. At the time that the tinnitus got really bad was, it started in about 2009, and I was at a radio station in the Twin Cities. My wife and I were co-hosting a morning show on a talk station in the Twin Cities, and I was doing Coast on the weekends, and I mean, I still remember it. It's kind of weird. And what it meant was I just stopped sleeping. So I had a morning show. I had to be on the air at 5:30 every morning, and I just wasn't sleeping. I couldn't. The noise was just keeping me up. And so it was about two and a half years after the onset of that before it was pretty clear it was just killing me. It was killing my health. It was just everything.
Those all-nighters will just crush you. I mean, those are fun when you're 20, but...
And I was doing them 3 nights a week, and I could only sleep when I was just totally exhausted. And I couldn't do the therapies. I couldn't try they had, like, there's this famous tape of me that people say it's me being drunk online. And it's not. But this was during that period where I was just so exhausted, and they were giving me these pills to take to try to get past the tinnitus at night. And that was the only way I was getting to sleep. And that was only on weekends. I could only do that on weeknights. I couldn't do it because I had to be up at 4:00 to prep for a show, so I couldn't do anything then.
Right.
So anyway, it's a long answer to that, but that was it. It was radio just got to be a point where I wasn't sleeping. I was sustaining myself on caffeine, and caffeine is terrible for tinnitus.
Oh, it is?
Oh my God, it's the worst thing. It's one of the worst things you can do. Caffeine and salt and anything else that raises your blood pressure raises the tinnitus.
Okay, blood pressure equals more what is the correlation there? It's just, I mean, I get that caffeine might get all of your senses more alert, but I didn't really think about blood pressure.
It brings your blood pressure up. They think it makes I know when I'm pushing it too hard, I can hear it because I go up an octave.
Wow, you can. Okay, now it's the ringing that goes up an octave, not the whole audio experience for you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, if it were my voice that went up an octave, that would be really embarrassing.
The helium treatment. Oh, gotta cut out the coffee. Need a decaf.
Exactly. I gotta explain this later on, but I gotta go.
Sure thing. Pleasure. You could have joined us. Yeah, I mean, that would be weird if your head was doing that. But so the tinnitus actually goes up an octave when the blood pressure's too high, too much salt, too much. That's interesting. I don't know much about this. I bought a house a few years ago, and it was right before the crash. So I became an accidental expert on loan modifications and homeowners associations and Federal Reserve policy, this, that, and the other. I became an accidental expert. And that's essentially what you became on this. I'm sure you probably didn't write thesis papers on tinnitus, growing up, but when it hits your life, you definitely had to say, all right, I need to become an expert here and seek out all the information possible, much like, anyone with a medical condition, I would imagine.
Yeah. In fact, in grad school, all of my papers for my PhD have either been about radio, which I don't seek out radio topics that kind of fall in my lap, and or murder, and I write a lot about murder.
Well then, Deacon, that's interesting. Well, I could imagine the tinnitus would make you want to murder people because you're not doing the radio as much. Murder.
I've always been interested in that subject, particularly how murder stories are told. So my PhD work has been mostly about how we tell true crime stories, true murder stories. What's the function of murder stories in society?
Well, Halloween, that's a good time to talk about that, I suppose. Are you excited for The Devil in the White City, that movie adaptation? Have you heard about it yet?
Oh, I read the book years ago, and in fact, it's required reading in a lot of school programs, which I think is interesting.
Really?
Yeah, my son's had it.
I got Wuthering Heights. I couldn't make my way. I just couldn't make my way through
Great
a
story.
third of that book. I'm sure it's a great story. I couldn't stand reading it. Like I can read English. I can't read British. It was just maddening for me. Different strokes, different folks. But
Well, I think that's interesting because, like, essentially Bronte's story in some form, right? There's the whole all that gothic stuff about the voice of the woman yelling for Heathcliff, and all of that stuff. There's so many really interesting, very sort of coasty elements to Wuthering Heights. I really like Wuthering Heights, so it's a bit of a challenge, and there are some things about it as a it's so good as a book. It doesn't translate well to movies, so that to me is always a good sign of a really good book. You can't quite capture something in a movie. I recommend it.
Oh, Stephen King's The Stand was an amazing book that very thick. It's a volume. There's quite a lot of words in there, and I've read it more than twice, maybe 3 times. But yeah, the TV series really did not do that any justice. But yeah, Devil in the White City was one that my uncle, he's a pastor and he does radio as well, and he's just been telling me, oh, you gotta check this out. It's been on my to-do list for so long, a lot like Atlas Shrugged. That sat on my shelf for 15 years before I had a little bit of downtime and finally read it. But yeah, I mean, anything that DiCaprio's in, it's probably going to be decent.
It's gonna be great. I mean, it's a great story. I wrote a true crime book last summer. I had 4 months in between the end of my coursework and when I knew I'd have to study for something, which I'm in the middle of right now, called comps. And these comp tests are really hard, and you have to study for them about 2 months pretty solidly. And I knew I had to study for comps starting in August. So there'd been this book that I'd been researching off and on about a murder in Kentucky in the 1930s. And so I wrote it. I researched it. I went to Kentucky several times. I found transcripts for the trials and other things, and I wrote this book, and it maybe today found a publisher for it, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy that process, and I think murder stories tell us something about us, and the way that the stories are told, they can be very affirmational in terms of it affirms what about us we should be suspicious of all the time, and what about us is good. And that's why I like those stories.
Interesting, because I definitely want to talk to you. But as soon as I heard the name of the title of your book, "How to Pray When You're Pissed at God," like it's just the title of that is perfect, because we've all been there. Anyone on a spiritual path has been at a point when you're pissed. And by the way, are you talking about Jackula the Vampire Dog? What are we talking about here? What's this murder book you were working on?
Oh, no, the one I'm working on this summer is called, at least the working title is Black Night for the Bluegrass Belle. And it's a story of a murder that happened in my family in 1936.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it involved a very powerful figure in Kentucky politics. And my mother was from Kentucky, and it was a real tragedy that turned into a prolonged, very interesting trial, and then after that, they continued to seek justice in ways that were non-traditional. But Jackula the Vampire Dog, that was a kid's book I wrote, and that was I did that for to raise money for pet charities in Minnesota. Same thing with the dog book before that, Dizzy the Mutt with the propeller butt, and then How to Pray When You're Pissed at God was from Random House.
Well, we are right by Halloween, so Jackula the Vampire Dog. Yeah. That's very fitting. What would you? Because I want to get to How to Pray, just because I have to pick your brain on this. But while we're talking, do you have a favorite horror movie, horror book, murder? But in that realm, what are some of the favorites that kind of got you hooked and that you still kind of have a special place for?
I do. I enjoy quite a bit the Hannibal series. So, I mean, I just enjoy them. I just think that I think Silence of the Lambs remains a classic. I'll watch it once or twice a year. As movies, and I enjoyed all of them for what they were. Even the first one, Manhunter, I thought they each have a little gift. I never saw the post Anthony Hopkins ones, but the ones with him in them I think are really good. I like The Others. Ever seen that with Nicole Kidman? It's a ghost movie.
The Others. I remember seeing the commercials for it. I never saw the flick though. I kind of developed this thing where I had a roommate in college. He was in my band. And he would watch these super effed up movies, and I mean just horror movies, like mainstream things that you're seeing advertisements for. But for me, when like these really weird, disturbing things were on film, I found it getting into my brain and getting into my dreams, and I didn't like having that a part of me. So I backed away from horror in general. But I love the apocalyptic things where you can kind of think about, such as Stephen King, The Stand, where, everything shit hits the fan, and then you go, okay, how do we rebuild? How do we fix what went wrong? How do we survive something traumatic? So I guess that's more my wheelhouse as opposed to the horror stuff.
I think that's really good. I mean, and horror to me, I don't do a lot of horror porn or anything like that. I don't enjoy movies too much where there's that much of it. I did like Cabin in the Woods. I thought that was fun. But the thing about like The Others with Nicole Kidman, it's really more of a mood, and that's what I like about it. It's got this like crazy mood, and so it pulls you into this space, and you're trying to figure out what's happening, and I think it's really enjoyable. So I like things like that where they really do any movie that can actually get under my skin a little bit. I think it's a major triumph because I feel like I know all of these tropes, right? I can see there's like it's nothing ever surprises me in a movie,
right?
And so when it actually does, I worship it.
Do you have a favorite producer these days? Anybody that's obviously the Star Wars has a new producer and a new team going at it, and the Batmans have been rebooted.
You said favorite producer. My first thought was Mark Ronson, who I think is genius, but he's music. Because I'm really into that whole. I think Bruno Mars is a lot of fun, and I really like what Ronson did with Bruno Mars, and I really like what he did with Amy Winehouse.
That kid is super talented, Bruno. I loved Amy Winehouse's style, that vibe, that whole genre. There's actually something really cool. Scott Bradley, I think Bradlee. I'll look him up in a second, but they do like this fusion postmodern jukebox. And they take these 1930s styles and then they redo songs of today, and it's so cool. And they're dressed up in that swing style. I love that stuff. And
I love genre mashups. I'm very interested in found footage, artifact kind of things when they're done well. I just saw, what was the most recent found footage movie that just came out? And I'm always attracted to seeing how people do them. It was the most recent M. Night Shyamalan movie. Okay. The one where it's called the Visitors or The Visit. Right. I think it was called. Anyway, I always like to see how people do things like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm always interested when people mash up things and try pushing the envelope. And there was I thought there was really cool soundtrack pieces on the last Gatsby remake they did, coincidentally the DiCaprio version,
right?
And there were some really cool music choices they made. They contemporized. They did the music anachronistically, and so there were songs that were obviously not around in the 20s. And it was beautiful. I thought it was really cool.
Well, that's kind of exactly what this is. Actually, I'm looking here. This is Bad Romance. It's vintage 1920s Gatsby style Lady Gaga cover featuring these people, and they do everything. Beyonce, Meghan Trainor, Britney Spears, Rihanna, White Stripes, Radiohead, Creep, and it's all just in this black and white kind of dolled up 20s, 30s, 40s. They're called postmodern jukebox. You might really like that stuff.
Well, I know I will. And you mentioned Jack White. I mean, I love the Bond movie, so we've been going back and watching the last couple movies before Spectre comes out. My son and my wife and I, and the it was one of the rare fails for me was the soundtrack that Jack White did for Quantum of Solace. And he did that song. He did a duet with Alicia Keys, and it just so does not work. And it's so weird for me to hear him do something like a swing and a miss like that, because otherwise he's
because in the beginning with Jack White and the White Stripes, I couldn't stand him. We were in Northwest Ohio at Bowling Green, and they're from Detroit and doing their thing, and they're number one songs and selling out stadiums. I'm like, dude, he's playing like 4 chords. They have like 2 notes on the bass guitar. The chick is not a talented drum. Like, what is the appeal? And it made me, I didn't care for it. I didn't really get the musicianship. Now, as years have passed, like Lazareto, I think is the name of that song. Man, that is a killer tune by Jack White. And I really liked him. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Cold Mountain with Nicole Kidman.
He did a great job with that.
He was a great actor in that, and that was a movie that had a feel to it. It had a tone.
He's in the soundtrack too, right?
Oh yeah, he was. His role in the movie was, what was he? Some traveling musician or somebody that played music, and so yeah, he did a lot of songs in that style, and that's where I first went, wait a minute, this guy has talent. Okay, I get it. I get it now.
The same moment with Kiss. I used to really be. I mean, I'm older, obviously, and I just did not get Kiss, and all of my friends are into Kiss. I just thought, oh my god, this is so third grade. I cannot believe. And then it's like, then I realized, wait, I'm the problem. They're the ones not taking it too seriously. I'm the one taking it too seriously.
They want to rock and roll all night and party every day, and you're trying to break it down and talk about tempo and rhythm and style. Come on, just party.
Funny was it was actually the song that everybody hated from Kiss. I Was Made for Loving You, which was their disco song, and that was the first time I went, okay, wait, that's kind of funny to me, because I thought they're willing just to just totally roll with whatever they need to do to keep going, and that kind of cracked me up, because I know a lot of musicians that you got to eat, right?
Oh yeah.
So you got to go with where the music's going. And I thought, well, okay. And I sort of went back retroactively and had a better appreciation for him. And then I sort of became a fan after that.
No, it's funny. My buddy, I used to work at the William Morris Talent Agency, and we went different paths, but he ended up working with the L.A. Kiss. And it's the arena football team co-owned by Gene Simmons, and we got to go to a game and go backstage and get our pictures taken with Gene Simmons, and it was a pretty funny moment. And yeah, I mean, music is interesting that way, because there is no right and wrong. Either a song speaks to you or it doesn't. It makes you feel something good or it doesn't, and sometimes things you like you don't care for by their 3rd or 4th album, and sometimes they grow on you in a good way.
I think Ariana Grande is wrong. I'm just saying. I think there are things that Bieber does that are just wrong. So I would disagree. But again, like I said, I'm old, so.
Man, I'll try not to badmouth and throw any more musicians under the bus. But yeah, definitely there are plenty of things that I can't stand. But all right, back to things you can't stand when you're pissed. Tell me about this book. I know it's old news. It's it's been out for a while, but I never had a chance to talk to you about it. So tell me the inspiration for how to pray when you're pissed at God.
So when I was getting my Master's of Divinity degree, which I did all the while I was on Coast, part of the requirement for that was to spend a lot of time in chaplaincy programs. So I was in these clinical pastoral environments where I was in a hospital I had to do like 3 shifts a week, and you both call on patients cold, or you get requests to come by and visit.
Right.
And there was a lot of anger, a lot of people who, while they were facing some of their greatest physical or emotional pain for where they were just were so angry, and it was getting in the way of their way they could pray. And there was a recurring theme to that experience of people saying, help me pray because I'm so pissed at God right now. And so that's really where the book started. And I felt I encountered angry prayers in seminary, in that they're in the Bible. So when we were studying the book of Psalms, we studied the anger Psalms. And there are a lot of them. And so I started to work with people on that basis of saying, well, what if I told you, there was there are prayers in the Bible that are angry with God. Would that help? And they're like, tell me about it, read it to me. And so that sort of became the nexus for how the book developed after that.
And did they tend to help when you were able to cite the places where people were angry with God in the Bible? Did you find that was a useful thing, a helpful thing for them?
Well, it's not magic, but yeah, I mean, it was interesting how it would just bring a smile to their face. So what I did, the focus of that was to, first of all, just be permissive. You know, here was a guy in a collar telling him, you can't hurt God's feelings. You know, go ahead, say you're in this situation, say what you want to say. And they would be like, well, I would say, you know, God effing this and effing that. And I'd be like writing it down going, yeah, keep going. Could I say that? And I'm like, yeah, what do you want to say? Because I don't believe in dishonest prayer. I think if we really believe in an omniscient God, God knows what you're thinking anyway, so you might as well say it. And,
good point.
Yeah, I mean, who are you hiding from?
Our Father who art in heaven. Wait, what did my grandmother tell me? Okay, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom. And you say it so many times, and you don't even take note of the phrases of the Lord's Prayer. You just do it. You know, I've fallen into that, and I've tried to teach myself. Pull yourself out of that. Say that if you want, but then say the specific stuff you're really thinking.
Well, wait a second. Now, look at the Lord's Prayer, which is really interesting. Well, back up and just say again, you know, yeah, we don't want to do prayers, like, to speak to your larger point, that this isn't Harry Potter, so we can't pull things out that are magic incantations, that if we say these words, it'll magically make something better. So we're not doing that. So, but if you look at the Lord's Prayer, which for people who don't know the Lord's Prayer, it's called the Lord's Prayer because Jesus said, this is this is all you have to pray. But what's interesting about it is it's a remnant prayer, that it speaks theologically to a time when people did associate God with being the bringer of something bad. So the prayer in the Lord's Prayer is to ask God to not tempt. Don't make things worse. Which is an interesting entreaty because in a post Christian world, that is to say, after Christ and after the rise of the Christian church, that theology really formally shifts away from thinking that God does anything bad to us, so it must always be the devil. But it wasn't actually what God said. God, you know, frequently in the Bible says anything that happens to you, good or bad, that's me.
Huh.
So, you know, that's why the Lord's Prayer in some ways is really a kind of a compelling prayer to say in a time of crisis, because what you're saying is, look, you're the boss, right? You know, our Father in heaven, you're the hallowed one. Your kingdom come. So it's all about you, God. Your will be done. I'll accept that on earth like it is in heaven. Heaven rules, and just like that, it will rule here. But give us this day our daily bread. So give me something here, because
right.
I'm starving. You know, forgive me my debts as we also have been forgiven. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. So the notion is just, you are the boss. You are totally here. So if anybody can make this right, you can. Now there's an element of insurrection, even in the Lord's Prayer on that. There's an element of rebellion that still exists in that prayer that people sort of pass over.
Elaborate on that point for a second.
Well, just, you know, our prayers don't have to always be prayers of praise. The idea of petitioning God, if we say something 9 times, God will do it. There's sort of this thing that's called God as valet theology, where we think of, you know, God, we want this parking space. God, we need a parking space. God, give us a parking space. Oh, there's a parking space. You know, and that's not really where I think the core relationship, if we really believe in a divine, we have to accept that we have a right to our voice. We may not get what we want, but we should speak openly and honestly, just like we would in any other relationship when we talk to God. And so when we say, God, this is horrible that my grandfather has cancer. It's not, please help me accept that grandpa has cancer, whatever. It's just, if you feel like saying, this totally sucks, he was a good man, and there's these idiots out there who are running over people and the drunk driving.
Oklahoma City, yeah.
Right. So why do they get to flourish while my grandpa suffers? That's not fair, God. If that's what you really feel, say it. And if that's how you really think, live that and feel like you're in that space, because that's an authentic prayer space. I think one of the greatest things we do to eliminate or to turn off any kind of authenticity in our religious experience is just to say things because we've always said them. And that just turns it into, it turns like nursery rhymes. And I believe in authentic prayer.
Well, see, and that's exactly the point I was getting at there, was that, you've said I have said the Lord's Prayer so many times, it's in a way, it just becomes this thing that you do, and I like to break it apart and actually think about phrase to phrase and point to point. Yeah, deliver me from evil, and all these things, like, hey, keep this stuff away. But
well, you look at the 23rd Psalm, and the prayer right next to the 23rd Psalm is the 22nd Psalm. And the 22nd Psalm is one of the angriest prayers in the Bible, and it begins with somebody who is claiming their space with God. And the first line of the prayer is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that is the prayer that Jesus starts on the cross. That's the prayer that, according to the New Testament, that's the prayer that Jesus starts saying on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And that's the 22nd Psalm. He doesn't say the 23rd Psalm. So, I think that's very compelling. And if you're in pain, and if you know somebody's in pain, be with them in the 22nd Psalm. Don't force them to turn the page. And, just because we're not comfortable with the fact that they're not in a good space, then don't make it be about you. Go help them. And they're going to be okay. And God will be okay too. If Jesus can say, my God, why have you forsaken me? We can too.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Hey, have you noticed over the years that, I don't even know if empirically speaking, if you've had a chance to, weigh the statistics and the numbers and the mathematics of it, but would you say that in your experience you found if people pray more unfiltered and authentic, that they tend to get better results, or have you not seen any specific correlation there?
So when you say results, I think the only thing we have prayer, the only thing we can measure in terms, I think, of a result is, did we feel better afterward?
Oh, okay.
And yeah, in that way, absolutely. Did you feel better afterward?
So you might not cure Grandpa's cancer. Grandpa might not get healthy, but he's going to feel better, or the daughter might feel a lot better, and that's kind of the point of spirituality and prayer anyway, is to get things off your chest, to kind of communicate what you're thinking. And okay, so maybe it's not getting the parking spot or making Grandpa healthy, but it's making the person feel better.
Well, that's the point. This is, if we can tell God, give us a parking space, or we can tell God, make that person better, guess what? We're God. Right? God is then just an extension.
What do you make of the phrase, the kingdom of heaven resides within us?
What do I think of the phrase?
The as above, so below, the kingdom of heaven resides within us. The crossovers where it's kind of like the thought that we are a part of this as much as it is a part of us.
Yeah, I'm kind of cool with that. You can put too fine a point on that, where there are some people who say, well, that each of us are God, and that together we form a big divine God. Or there are people who, in a Gnostic sense, take that a little differently, and even people who are Luciferian use similar language as well. I just think the important part about language, no matter what phrase we're using, is just to remember it as being limited by the fact that we're putting words to the divine. And there's only so much our words can do. And when we attempt to do too much with words, I think we give too much credit for finding the exact right word. And what we just always have to remember is we just have to hold things in tension with the fact that this is, even really good poetry isn't perfect for every application. And there's times when reading the 23rd Psalm, if you don't read it in the King James Version, the one that has all the eths and all the weird, wants and all the other words that aren't actually in the Bible, if we don't do that version, it doesn't sound right. We have to read it with the Elizabethan language sometimes, or it doesn't sound effective.
So now we're on Wuthering Heights. If it wasn't read in British, like The Simpsons, if Harry Shearer actually took his hiatus, which he thankfully did not, and he came back for another season. If it was Mr. Burns by any other name, Heathcliff wouldn't sound the same.
It's funny. Harry is not a religious person, and so every so once in a while I'll slip if I'm in an email and I'll put like God bless, and he'll write back what? I always have to take out that language with Harry, but
self-censorship. Yeah. No, but the concept of I mean, you look around the world today, whether it's ISIS, whether it's there's 100 things going on. It's Islam, it's Judaism, it's Christianity, it's a lot of other things on top of it. It's a question that one of your coast mates, like I referenced earlier, that conversation with John B. Wells, one of our recent shows hit on the issue of, do you feel that we're kind of in an ultimate battle between good and evil right now? Do you feel like anything has ramped up where it maybe has been building or growing, something you're feeling that you haven't felt over the past few decades?
Well, no. And I win on this argument because I'm a student of history. So anybody who believes that, I'm okay with that. You just tell me the year. You pinpoint the day where you feel like things were better back then. There is not. I love history. There is no better time to be living in than now. And for all of, the idea of good and evil. Boy, don't get me started on this, because I'll talk about it from a Christian context first. It's just that we have some of the wimpiest Christians on the planet right now, where the idea of persecution to them is that they don't get to persecute others. That if they don't have the right to be able to tell people you can't get married, then their religion is being persecuted. I am not a fan of that. I think if the real persecution on the planet exists, don't get me wrong, but Christians in the United States, just because everybody's not going to walk around saying Merry Christmas every 2 seconds, the Pilgrims didn't believe in that. It's funny. We talk about the Pilgrims were against this notion of Christmas, the way we celebrate it.
They were very austere. They were very austere and underspoken, mellow.
Exactly.
Not showy.
Like somehow that has become mythologized as there was a time when everybody did this, and no, they didn't. And all I mean to say by that is that yes, there is always evil, and yes, there is evil on the planet right now, and we are facing it everywhere. But the evil is always within us, and it is extreme beliefs have always been with us. And whether it's religion or politics, somebody is always trying to bring meaning to their life by being willing to be more cruel than the person next to them. And they
hold on, say that again. About being more cruel than the person next to them.
People find meaning in cruelty because it's powerful. And so the idea, it's very. You just look at the way that ISIS recruits people who have an empty life.
Right.
They try to give meaning to somebody who's 22 and they're not getting laid, right? Or they have no prospect at all of ever getting married or having a great job. And ISIS comes along and says, we'll give you meaning. You'll be like a god. You'll be a warrior. You'll be some sort of soldier saint. Well, sign me up.
They've actually I read a story about all these, not necessarily ISIS related, but more about like these idiot shooters that go into schools, or they go on these stupid rampages, and half the time, kill themselves at the end of it. But it was Bill Maher. He did a big bit about it, about all these mass murders and these school shootings. It's from frustrated guys who can't get laid. And that's kind of almost exactly what you were saying. It's just someone that doesn't have much going on in their life, positive, And, you know, then they just want to inflict as much damage as possible around them, and then you know, peace out. Just kind of take the coward's way out and just go.
In the chat rooms, that's called the rise of the beta male. Right?
The rise of the beta male.
The beta. This is a whole thing. If you
tell me about it, because I'm maybe a little new to this.
Well, you and me both. But, I mean, the idea of the rise of the beta, this was the belief that the alphas have to be killed. They're the ones having all the fun. You know? And so the most recent shooter was going after the alphas. Or the guy who was the kid who was in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, and just that creepy, weird kid, and they went after sorority girls or something.
Right, it was all the people who rejected him, and they want the alphas. He's not an alpha. They will feel my wrath. So, you know, I think that there's truth to that. I think but there's also another piece that these are people who are looking to either do death by cop, or they just want an elaborate suicide. And I've been saying for years that the reason why these things happen in groups is because one person says, aha, right there, everybody will know my name. And I feel like a total nobody, and if it takes me killing 8 innocent people, well, at least they'll know my name. So, I mean, it's sort of narcissistic, sociopathic thinking anyway, but it's coupled with somebody who's not willing to do the heavy lifting. They don't want to, they're probably kind of lazy, and they want something to be, however the pieces add up to them. There's a lot of people that do evil acts just because it's just out of ego, and they don't care about anybody else.
Well, as we shift gears here a little bit and start winding things down, you're talking about narcissism and sociopaths. 2016 election. Obviously not picking a horse in the race like you were doing, like some of the radio gigs wanted you to do, perhaps, in the early days. But what are you taking from this race so far on the Republican side, Democratic side, independent? Are you following this closely, or do you not even care?
There's nobody that I like that much, so I'm not driven by nobody's getting me excited. I am bothered by, however, because of a lot of time that I've spent with tracing the psychology of serial killers and people who are disruptors to the social norms, people who feel like it's their right to just, do whatever they want. I'm concerned about the way in which the Trump story keeps getting rewritten. He is a classic narcissist sociopath, and he isn't the kind who is never going to kill anybody, and that's good. But he follows the same patterns of thinking that most narcissist sociopaths do, and they're very attractive people. Narcissist sociopaths do really well. If they're males, for example, they do really well with women.
Oh, very charismatic, exactly.
But the relationships never last. Trump's on his third wife. He's slowing down a little bit in his life, but there's a part where you just cannot take narcissist sociopaths. Obama, I believe, is very much a narcissistic personality, but he doesn't actually cross the line into sociopath. And this whole thing and I'm just going by what Trump says. So Trump talks about being a counter puncher. Everybody starts it with him, and then he punches back and he teaches them a lesson. Well, that's classic narcissist sociopath thinking. And he is, to me, it's not a danger. It's not like I'd leave the country. But I'm worried by the way that people talk about him so glowingly when he gives, all of this talk about what he would do comes packaged with everybody's a loser. It's all about winners and losers. It's all about if I were in charge. He referred the other day when he was talking about George W. Bush, and he referred to it as his reign as president. And I thought, God, that is so telling about Trump, that he thinks of it as a reign. It's not a reign. They're not a monarch. And I think he's the one that I've sort of been fascinated with, and I spend a lot of time on Twitter calling him out on things, especially when he starts.
You actually troll Trump on Twitter. That's tough to say, actually. Troll Trump.
He spends so much time talking about what a great Christian I am and whatever, and it's like he doesn't do anything that falls along the lines of there's nothing about thou shalt be a counterpuncher only. There is nothing.
Turn the other counterpunch.
Yeah, there's nothing about that in there, and
well, you did bring up monarchs, and I would argue that the Bush-Clinton dynasties are dangerously close, if not completely, into the oligarchical realm right now, and
well, they're not. They don't follow a definition of oligarchy, but I know what you mean. I mean, I get the spirit of that, but the fact is, whether they keep getting elected or not, we get the we get the leaders we deserve. So that if we elect them, then that's our damn fault. And it's not a parliamentary system that puts them back in power because we voted a party. We actually have to take responsibility for voting for them. So if Hillary ends up being the next president, that was on us. We did that. So I hope that that whatever it is that we elect in the next cycle, we just take responsibility for that, and we recognize up front we chose it. I hope we make good choices here coming up. So far, according to the polls, I don't think we're making good choices on either side.
I look around, I see a lot of people that, some of the things Bernie Sanders says, it's like, oh yeah, there's a famous Simpsons line. Yeah, Homer says, communism works in theory.
Right.
And it's like, oh God, are we really firing up the electorate over these isms that have proven themselves to be fit? And I get that the system's rigged. I get some of this other stuff too, but I'm infinitely fascinated by it. But I feel so differently about this election than the previous ones. I don't know. I don't know if I can really put my finger on exactly why.
It's because it's right now on both sides. Well, until recently, more the rise of Hillary recently, but there was a sense of the outsiders were ruling on both sides. And you had a Trump versus Bernie kind of showdown coming. If you ever want a contrast for A-B, wow, you've got Trump and Bernie Sanders. And for whatever we don't like about Bernie Sanders, at least the guy, he doesn't fudge on, at least in my experience, on what he believes. He'll just keep saying it. This is what I believe. This is what we got to do. And you either like it or you don't. And I'm a little bit more worried about Trump's ability to say things that can't figure out exactly what he means or how that's going to get done. We build a wall, it's going to be huge. What is exactly he thinking? How that's going to work? It didn't work for France with Germany, for God's sakes. But I think there's something to be said for how people are reacting, and I'd like to think that we're kind of in a crazy phase, and we're gonna swing back more toward a place where people feel like, all right, who can actually govern this country? Who can govern everybody in it? Not just a faction, not just a portion of it, but who can we elect as president who can reasonably govern the whole country? And I hope we get there. I
don't even know if such an option exists or if we could invent one, but yeah, that is an ideal to strive toward. We'll have to see how it plays out. Well, all right. Let me do this, Ian, since we're about out of time here. I obviously want to thank you for jumping on and talking to us, especially with the comments that we had and helping you, the fact that you were able to bring some of that information and provide some of that about the tinnitus or the tinnitus. I'm going to keep saying tinnitus unless I'm a complete moron for doing so. I know that's helpful, but, we kind of touched on how you got into Coast, when you left, and kind of covered some other ground there in between. Of course, we'll keep... When is your book coming out? When is the Black Knight for the Bluegrass Belle? When's that coming?
That's good. Don't have a date yet, but the hope would be that it would be out for spring. So I've been speaking with a couple different publishers. It could happen. I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I got my own Cleveland sports book in the works, and it's been in my head for so many years. I'm just now putting it to paper and getting it out. It's called "There's Only Next Year." And it's
college. One of my college roommates was John Modell.
Oh no, you said the name.
Yeah, I know.
You went Voldemort on me, the man whose name shall not be spoken.
I know, but it's true. John was one of my college roommates.
Which one was he? It was
He's the sane one, relatively. I think he's the one who he's third, I think, in line.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's painful, the premise of my book is just more along the lines of I think something seeps in psychologically to a region when they're gonna find a way to screw this up. They always lose when it counts. Oh look, I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hey, I'm a Cubs fan. I live there.
Oh, okay, you got me. See, but that's the difference. You're a Cubs fan, but Chicago fans have had Michael Jordan, Walter Payton, titles all around him except for one. It's like Cleveland, nothing.
3 of the last 6 years of the Stanley Cup. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm with you. There's things that help take the sting away from the Cubs, but it's still I can still relate because you just know something's going to go wrong. It's all going to fall apart. You don't know how yet, but it's going to. And you listen for that distant squeak of the wheel that's about to come off, and then it does.
Well, the Steve Bartman stuff. No, I mean, mine, I do a show called The Unhappy Hour. That's my Cleveland sports radio show, and I do Agree to Disagree, which is what this is. And sometimes I do politics to get my mind off of sports, which is just how bad it is. And sometimes I do sports to get my mind off politics, which is kind of how it's supposed to be. But as a Cleveland fan, it's all mixed up in the process. So, since you're such a prolific writer, Ian, what advice do you give to somebody like myself who's multiple pages over multiple platforms and different notes and titles and things going on about putting it all together? What advice do you give for someone to knock out a project?
Get it done. I mean, I do this all the time. And it seems as silly as just finish one thing, spend some time, block out some time, say by this time I'll get X amount of done on it, and hit that mark. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be publishable worthy right out of the box. But if you're saying I'm with this, I need this project done. I want to write a 200-300 page book about X. Then by such and such a date, I will have written 100 pages, and then get that done. And so just work on it in chunks. Try not to do everything all at once. Just realize every day, when it comes to creativity, as much as fun as creativity is, it's still kind of a trudge. And we have to use that part of our brain that isn't just sitting around dreaming about it. Sometimes we have to make it real.
Actually get there and do it.
Time, do it in chunks, make it real.
All right. So as we wrap this up now, what are you doing now? And is there any chance you're coming back to radio?
I think, by the way, you do a really nice show. You're a really good interviewer. You know what you're doing. I feel radio doesn't need me, and I feel like I would be inviting a world of trouble for me to start getting back into it again. I don't foresee that happening. I'm grateful for these opportunities to think that there was a time when I had that part of my life wrapped in radio, and I love radio, and it's awesome. But I don't think there's that. I think I'm forward focused on what I'm going to do in academia. I'm about 2/3 of the way done, maybe a little further in the PhD process. So I want to wrap that up, and then I'll take a look at what's out there. But I can't imagine I'll ever be doing radio again. But I'll certainly be talking about it, and I'll certainly be writing about it. And anytime anybody gives me an opportunity, I'll certainly be on it.
Well, thank you for those kind words, by the way. But with what you're doing in academia, is the goal to then teach? Is it to do like you said, going to hospitals and working with people? What is the goal for Ian Punnett these days? What are you?
I teach a course on writing for electronic media right now. I taught a course in pop culture last semester for about 200 students. That was a trick. A
trick or a trip?
Both, but 200 is a trick. I mean, that's a lot of students. And I do a lot with I do a lot of writing. So I'm doing a lot of academic writing where I'm doing research, and I just I'm working with the Journal of Audio and Radio Media. So we're kind of tracking radio and media trends, podcasting being one of them, and we're sort of looking at this sort of from 30,000 feet.
And what would you say the biggest trend is for the new American media, for the new global media?
What you're doing, which is really sort of a micro media in some ways, but it's just as valid. And actually, you do it really well, which I have to say, maybe the last hour and change pleasurable for me. I don't know about anybody else, but I really enjoyed it. And what's really fun about that is that you are in command of what you're doing. You know who you are in it. This doesn't seem like a big ego thing, which is where a lot of people get into trouble with media. The trend is just like this. You might have, I don't know how many people typically listen to one of your podcasts.
We're charting about 500,000 on YouTube, kind of paying a little bit more attention to some of those demographics after the fact than we are for the live launch. But we've seen an exponential growth over the past year and a half, where just charting the statistics, watching it, going, okay, we're starting to multiply here. We're 4.5 years in on a 10-year plan to become the largest media company on the planet. So, lofty goals and some growth along the way. Well,
good. And what, if you really think about it, on some of the lowest nights of viewership for CNN, and this doesn't happen very often, but it happens often enough, they have fewer than 100,000 viewers.
Wow.
So think on that. There are bad radio shows in some towns that have over 100,000 people that listen to it every day. And they're not even necessarily good at it. They just kind of cover a niche, and there's a lot of people that want that niche. So that's kind of the future of media, is that people are going to continue. The idea of mass media, it's much more of a concept now than it is a reality. And mass has been redefined in ways which we don't even think of. I mean, the Super Bowl was, right? We think of as being this big mass event. And that's great. It is a big mass event. But generally the ratings that the Super Bowl gets every year is what the premiere of Star Trek got on NBC the first night it ever aired.
Oh.
Yeah.
To compare it that way, I hadn't really thought about that.
You look up in terms of share, and you're a hit TV show if you got like a 7 share or whatever. And in the old days, they used to complain when it would get below a 30, and like, this only gets a 22 share now. We're not sure we're going to keep it. Networks would kill for 22.
Yeah, when there were 4 channels on the air, and that was about it, and you had to walk up there. There was no such thing as a remote, and yeah.
That should show you the difference between what was mass media and what it is now. Yeah,
and I've been seeing it too. Just that the domination. ESPN's laying off a ton of people. It's just the big behemoths. It's a lot like if I'm in an Uber or a Lyft and I go somewhere and I look over and I see a taxi. It's like, oh, look, a dinosaur, kids. Look, it's a dinosaur.
And ESPN, of course, bet wrong. So that's part of the problem. They paid big money for things that are bringing in big returns, and unfortunately, they put it down on, what is it, 24 red or 23 red, whatever it was, and it didn't come up.
Always bet on black.
Yeah.
Wesley Snipes taught me that one.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies, actually, for total cheese factor. Passenger 57. Yeah,
I'm gonna get you, sucker. That's one of my guilty pleasures. Have you ever seen that one?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. One of Chris Rock's earliest movies. Jim Brown in that too. Pretty good stuff. All right. Well, Ian, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. And like you were saying, you don't do a lot of these, but maybe from time to time, if I reach back out, we could do another.
Well, say hi to everybody who is related to Coast, and thank you for letting me pass along my gratitude to everybody who helped make that so much fun for so many years.
Well, hey, we've known Tom Danheiser for a long time, and we've interviewed George a few times, and John B. being a regular. It's just, fans of Coast, we're kind of hardwired in a similar way, I think. I think we're willing to consider the ridiculous, because sometimes the ridiculous is the actual truth. And I think just having that openness to allowing a conversation to happen instead of yelling over someone, I think that's a personality trait that I've encountered with a lot of Coast fans and Coast hosts over the years. So I think we're kindred spirit as far as the listeners and the people who participated. So it's always good to connect a few more of them, and having you on today, that certainly did that for us. So thank you very much, Ian, for your time.
Well, thank you. I hope I didn't repeat myself so much, although I'll repeat myself one last time. Deus te amat, and I do too.
Hey, the best place to follow you and stay updated when your books come out, is it just at Deacon Punnett on Twitter, or is there another good space?
Nope, that's it right there. It's the one I go to the most.
Excellent. All right, Ian, you have a great night, sir. Thank you very much for joining us here on Agree to Disagree. And for everybody out there in the TNAM radio network, I want to thank you. Especially, this is how small this world is. We get a little comment from somebody on a video that we posted, on an interview that we did. Somebody brought up tinnitus, and it reminded me of Ian. And I said, I haven't heard from Ian in a long time. I want to talk to that guy. We reach out through social media, we make it happen, we have a radio show, and now we welcome your comments. So make sure you're subscribed to youtube.com/thenewamericanmedia. Check out our homepage, thenewamericanmedia.com. On the right-hand side is the TNAM radio button. That's where you click play to listen live. Underneath that is our Facebook feed. You can like it right there. Or you can do a search for The New American Media with spaces in between. At American_media_ is where we're at on Twitter. I don't know. Maybe we have an Instagram too. We don't use it very much. But hey, thank you very much for participating in this chat. And this is just to remind you that we really do try to have as many conversations and keep these conversations going online. So leave your YouTube comments, share these with your buddies, and know that we're listening. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll talk again soon. Peace.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to Agree to Disagree with Brian Engelman, and this is John B. Wells reminding you that not only is Brian Engelman a cool guy, and not only is the newamericanmedia.com a very cool platform, but here's a cool idea for you, too. Are you alone? Not really. Do you like dogs? Do you like cats? You do. Of course you do. Everybody does. One or the other, maybe even both. You know, there are a lot of dogs and cats that are at shelters right now, and if somebody doesn't take them home, they're going to wind up euthanized. That's a nice way of saying they're going to be killed because there's simply not enough room. I guarantee it, the best dogs and the best cats, the best pets come from shelters. There's something about dogs and cats they know. They know where they are. You walk through one of them, and certainly at least one is going to look at you and go, I wish you'd take me home. I'm in hell. Please take me out of here. It'll be the best thing that you ever did for your soul. You'll feel good about it. And not only that, but you have a friend for life. Doesn't matter if you got money, you don't have money. Well, it doesn't make any difference to a dog or cat. All they need is the sound of your voice and maybe even the stroke of your hand, and they're fine. Maybe a little food every once in a while. The sweetest sound that those pets ever hear is your voice. Think it over and adopt a cat or a dog from a local shelter today. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did.